Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The Supreme Court of the United States has overturned Roe v. Wade, the 1973 ruling that guaranteed women's constitutional right to an abortion. It is the first time ever that the Supreme Court has taken away rights from a group in the country, opening the floodgates for states to essentially ban abortion and creating a legal framework for further attacks on civil rights. What has been the reaction so far? How will this overturned case impact the U.S. society? And what other civil rights could be redefined by the Supreme Court in the coming years? To discuss these issues and more, I'm glad to be joined by Professor Jinzhao from Beijing Foreign Studies University and Harvey Dzodin, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and Jing, attorney at the CGTN law firm. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qianduo. Welcome to the show. Professor Li, I will start with you. I wonder, what's your first response? What do you make of this ruling, basically robbing women of their abortion right?
Well, when the news first leaked out in May, I was shocked. But I had my wishful thinking that the opposing side would be powerful enough to press down this verdict. But I was really, really surprised and really shocked when it got finalized. I was really speechless. I couldn't believe that such kind of verdict could take place in the 21st century.
Okay, Harvey, you are American. I mean, you are familiar with the politics. For example, when former President Trump appointed 3 judges to the Supreme Court, probably at that time even people were expecting something dramatic could happen like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really no surprise. But, you have to look at this from a long-term perspective as well, because since the 1960s, radical Republicans decided they had to play a long game to defeat liberalism after the overwhelming defeat of their hero and presidential candidate in 1964, who was Senator Barry Goldwater. He's a guy who famously said that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. And he was the inspiration for countless conservatives who came after him, including those who stormed the Capitol in January of 2021. So there are people who want little or no government. And they've been working on this since that time, really. They've been funded by 1% of the American population, the fat cats and capitalists. And you take somebody like the author of the opinion, Justice Alito. He's been fighting abortion rights since he was a student at Harvard Law School, and then inside the Justice Department and later at the Supreme Court. So he and other Republican justices, it's no coincidence, are all members of something called the Federalist Society. It's a far-right organization to whom Donald Trump outsourced the task of choosing judges based on an extremist big government agenda. And now with this decision, it seems like they've succeeded beyond their wish.
Mm-hmm. Jing, not exactly defending the ruling, but some have pointed out that the ruling itself didn't outlaw abortion. It just says the Constitution does not explicitly guarantee it as a right. Is that legitimate? Probably explanation?
It's pretty long opinion, including all the dissenting or concurring opinions. And one of the things that are really standing out, I think like what Harvey said, right? One of this Federalist society's sort of a quote unquote influence. And one of the big things that the justice pointed out is that the previous decision and Roe v. Wade did not consider the state's interests at all. I think that's one of the fundamental position of Federalist thinking. Now, Federalist in the American context is really about how the balance of the power between federal government and the state government. At the same time, another big thing what's really going on is how the justice think about, in what way the Constitution should be read. Now, the justice keep emphasizing that what they're doing is really pointed out there's no constitutional right to abortion. they keep saying that they're actually really arguing. I think they did a good job in one way or the other. That the pointed out that the previous reasoning in Roe and Wade and also the Casey decision were not really well reasoned. And the justice pointed out even the dissenting opinion agreed that there's really no really strong basis to say there's a constitutional right to abortion. So the decision itself is it really reflects the deep-rooted thinking in the part of the America. If you're looking at it, I think the majority justice believe that, well, we got to really respect in what way the Constitution should be interpreted. So I think this part of it is a really big legal job. And of course, in the decision, the majority of the opinion totally rejected. This is really the politics motivated opinion. They do point it out, this is really the abortion, why this disease is so important, or why the issue of abortion is so important, because it's really about morality. So that takes a lot of discussion and then complexity to interpret, understand the decision.
Professor Lee, in our previous show, which also touched upon the same topic when the news was leaked to the media, so one of our guests basically pointed out that the need for abortion will always be there, whether it is banned or not. Is that the case?
Yes, definitely. Whether you legalize it or you make it illegal, the need for abortion is always there. Actually, in the time of the 1970s, under the consideration of Roe versus Wade, there was a study conducted at that time. It showed that without legal protection of abortion, the deaths of women going through the surgery of abortion was 1.8 out of every 10,000. But after the legalization, the death rate dropped to 0.1 out of every 10,000 women going under abortion. So you can really see the difference.
That's right. The immediate impact, let's take a look at that. Harvey, so far, because of the Supreme Court ruling, a total of 22 states across the U.S. will either ban or restrict abortion, while 16 other states, and Washington, D.C. have laws protecting the right to abortion. What does that mean for the U.S. society? What will be the risks, for example?
Well, to me, it means that the women and their families most affected, many of them poor single parents holding low-wage jobs, are going to be foreclosed from getting abortions in those 22 states and not able to afford the money or time off to travel to other states where abortion might be legal. So the ruling means that many must get dangerous back alley abortions using things like coat hangers and other crude methods that were used before Roe versus Wade. But the risk, though, isn't only to women involved, but I think to the whole American system of government, which is it's now basically controlled by big money interests who'd like to turn back the clock by 1 or 2 centuries when blacks were slaves, women couldn't vote or have property, and there was no right to contraception or abortion or same-sex marriage or even interracial marriage. So the ruling, along with the last week's cases extending gun rights and further destroying the separation of church and state, is the most recent proof that the American system is broken. And unless voters remove their enablers in Congress in November, all hope is going to be lost. And yeah, I think, well, it's unlikely. States could criminalize other actions, even beyond this, beyond the ruling last week. And that is that they could forbid people from getting out of state, going out of state to get abortions, or from even getting the abortion pill, which is approved by the FDA in their own state. So it's really a terrible situation. That women can't even control their own body in the 21st century in America.
Mm-hmm. Jing, if you look at the consequence, basically, people will continue to do whatever they need to do, for example, abortion. But because of the the move to make it illegal. Sometimes they have to take risks or take trouble probably to travel to another state to have the surgery. So we're seeing probably, more unpleasant consequences for people.
I think this is the part that the justice should certainly have big compassion for. But again, what this majority opinion is really about, they really cared about, is in what way the Constitution should be interpreted. One of the key position for the justice who really insist on the regional meaning of a constitution is that they said, well, we have to interpret the Constitution in a right way. And if for the big issue, like in what way the abortion should be permitted in different states, that decision should be left to the elective representatives. I think my own personal reading is that it's definitely not the majority of justice don't care about the women's health or the choice of women, but that they think, according to the Constitution, the way the American Constitution was constructed, that's the issue got to be dealt with at the state level. I think that's the way the majority justice look at it.
Mm-hmm. Well, Harvey, obviously, the debate between the pro-life camp and the pro-choice camp has been decades. It's a complicated topic. Let's admit that. As Jing pointed out, it's the ruling by the justices. Mostly conservative justices here, the majority. It's an individual ruling, individual decisions. If we have a more liberal, let's say, justices, probably we have a different ruling, right? I say it's complicated because it's probably also related to religion, race, in addition to right issues here. For example, Republican Congresswoman Mary Miller said at an event with Trump that Roe decision is about protecting white life. Some say it's politics, pointing to the fact that the conservatives have been working on overturning the case for decades. So what is it really about?
Oh, it takes a lot of dialogues to go into that one question. But if I can boil it down a little bit to a couple points. First, you mentioned religion, and that's very interesting because one of the things that doesn't come up is that the Supreme Court is composed of 9 members. 6 of those members are Catholic. Another member was born Catholic, but is now a different religion. And the 2 others are Jewish. And so I remember, I'm so old, I remember in 1960 when Senator John Kennedy then was running against Vice President Nixon for the presidency. A lot of people charged that President Kennedy could not be a good president because he would take his orders from Rome and from the Pope. And Catholic. I'm not saying that the justices, Catholic. I'm not saying that the Supreme Court justices now take their orders from the Pope. But when there's 22% of the country is Catholic and more than 2/3 of the Supreme Court is Catholic, there's something wrong with that picture. So I think that the balance is really out of whack. And so I believe that, yes, it's individual judges and justices making decisions, but you have to consider both this imbalance and the fact that, in my view, 2 of the justices are illegitimately appointed. And at least 3 of the justices lied in their confirmation hearings. So it shows that the system depends on the goodwill of men and women, and that goodwill has been replaced by politics and by ideology, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. What about the race issue? Some say, state right had somehow always related to the white supremacist goals and fight, probably in the country.
We've had this battle since the beginning of the country about state versus national rights. We fought a civil war over it, and it's really a problem in our country that hasn't gone away. Really, on the surface, it sounds absolutely fine that decision-making should be pushed down to the state level because they can consider these things according to the will of the local population and all that. But if you scratch a little below the surface, you'll see Republicans have shredded protections for minority voting rights. They've gerrymandered districts to dilute the power of Democrats, that poor people and minorities don't have much of a vote. And they've made a laughingstock of what we thought was in place, which is one person, one vote. So the system at the state level is even more rigged than at the national level. I think it's really an unfortunate situation, and it's contributing to what I always have called lately, unfortunately, the phenomenon of the untied states of America.
Yes, Professor Lee, this ruling obviously attracting attention from around the world. For example, leaders of even U.S. allies from Canada, from France, from the UK have all criticized the ruling, being critical of it, and they were shocked. They say it's appalling. It seems to me like the rest of the world mostly sees it as a right issue. They say this is inherent right of a woman to make decision about her body.
Right. Yes. I agree. I think over 100 countries in the world are admitting that women have their choice and their right over their body. So I think the whole world is appalled because the United States seems to be going backward for 150 years. And since the United States is the center of world's attention, although it is not the most radical in terms of anti-abortion of women, it is leading a very bad example. A lot of conservative forces in other countries will say, hey, if the United States can do this, then we can also cook up something against the women in similar fashion. So I think this impact is not just within the United States, but it's worldwide.
Mm-hmm. Well, He Jing, if you look at the domestic impact on the upcoming midterm election, for example, or even longer 2024 presidential election, because many people say this is a legacy for President Trump, for his appointment of the 3 conservative justices. So is that a strong plus for Trump? I mean, if he decides to run for president again in 2024?
Well, that's probably what gives some momentum to the people that who are really against this decision, right? There are people. I think there's some discussion that people will really group together that will really motivate the voters to come out to support a Democratic or support whoever really against his opinion. Of course, there are also the other side of the opinion that while people will think that the Trump side did the right thing and then get more support. So I don't know at the end of the day what it will show up. That's probably, I think, something that everyone's waiting to see.
Mm-hmm. Well, Harvey, some would point out like 5 of the 6 Supreme Court justices, conservative justices, who just voted to overturn the rule were nominated by a Republican president, either Bush or Trump, who lost the popular vote in both of them. So people say this is like the country is now run by a minority, which raises questions about the U.S., as you pointed out, the system, the democracy. Is that a legitimate concern?
Oh, I think it's absolutely a legitimate concern. And it goes to the fundamental nature of our country. I do think that for a long time, the United States has been run by a small minority of capitalists and let's call them the 1%ers who want to bend the government to their will. And I think with the last couple of rulings in the last week, they've shown great success in doing this. So a lot of work needs to be done. A lot of work needs to be done in terms of making it, again, one person, one vote. A lot of work needs to be done in terms of making sure that special interests can't buy elections, which they can do now thanks to recent Supreme Court rulings and all the rest. So I fear that this country that was much greater when I was growing up, in my view, and it had a lot of idealism, has now moved back by decades, if not a couple centuries, to a country that's much like it was at the time of the American Revolution or Civil War. We don't have what we should have in the 21st century, and that's an enlightenment. We have a big disappointment.
A lot needs to be done probably to correct the move. But then, of course, one of the steps people could do something is really about the upcoming midterm election in November. And both President Biden and Nancy Pelosi quickly made abortion an issue on ballot in November. Harvey. But if you look at the young people, young supporters of the Democrats, so they are kind of reluctant to cast a vote for the Democrats, expressing the sort of disappointment. They say, some would say, my rights should not be a fundraising point for the Democrats. What's the sentiment is like? How likely that will become an issue on the ballot?
Well, it's a complicated picture. The picture is complicated because people generally don't vote on one issue, although there's lots of single interest groups that have really impacted American democracy negatively. So what's on people's minds now? Yeah, of course, abortion is on people's minds. And of course, gun control is on people's minds. But what's on their minds more is the hyperinflation that we're suffering in America today. And the fact that the current administration, unfortunately, and the Federal Reserve, who have the main responsibility for this, don't have any handle on that, don't have any control. So I think whether it's young people, middle-aged people, or older people, they're going to vote with their pocketbooks. And I worked with Jimmy Carter. In Jimmy Carter's time, there was about 20% inflation, which is astronomical. And so Carter didn't have a chance, given that inflation, even given all the other good things he did, and Ronald Reagan won. So I think that the election is going to be based on the fact that inflation is high, not on these other issues. And also, to add insult to injury, the Congress will probably go over to the Republicans. It's usually the case in off-year elections, as we call them, that the party out of the White House makes significant gains. And I think that's going to happen here. I think it's also going to enable Trump, or Trump with a brain, to be elected 2 years from now or so. And in that case, for America, I think it's pretty much game over.
Professor Lee, obviously, if there is a win for the Republicans in the Congress in November, and then probably 2 years later for the executive branch there, and then people are concerned about other rights beyond abortion, such as same-sex marriage, the use of contraception, etc. Are you concerned? Probably there is a further increase of people's right.
Yes, I think so. Like one of the conservative judges, Clarence Thomas, he has made it clearly that the abortion, to undo the right to abortion, is just the beginning. Although the other judges are saying that this decision is a separate one or independent one, but a lot of people are concerned that what will follow after this this denial of the abortion rights. So people are worried that the next one probably will be the denial of same-sex marriage or even the use of contraception. And some people are joking that probably the right of mixed race marriage should be rescinded because Clarence Thomas, he married a white woman, because that is also not clearly indicated in the Constitution of the 18th century. So definitely, I think if the Republican wins the midterm election and also the election of 2024, the United States is going to be further ripped apart, will further disintegrated, and that's not something we want to see.
Well, Jing, do you think the latest decision, the ruling, could be one day again be overturned? I mean, if there's enough number of liberal justice in the Supreme Court. So something similar could happen in the future?
It's very interestingly, this decision actually really spent a lot of length to talk about stare decisis. This one of fundamental principle, because lots of arguments, especially from the Casey decision, rely on that to say we don't want to overturn the Roe and Wade, even though we don't really agree with their reasoning. But it really complied with precedents. But in this decision, they make that a lot of analysis make that very clear. When it's necessary, they will overturn the precedents. So it's hard to predict what's going to come up in the future. But whoever wants to overturn it, they have a really hard time to argue why there's under the regional constitution, why there's a constitutional rights to abortion. Again, I think this decision did a very detailed analysis why it is not a fundamental right with the meaning of the 14th Amendment, why the abortion is not something they call the quote unquote deep-rooted in the nation's history and the tradition. So I think there's a lot of American context. It's very complicated, and whoever wants to overturn it, that's a big job. But we're probably hoping. I personally actually really will be anxious to see whether somehow American people will stay divided on this issue. It's very clear the majority thinks it is probably acceptable for the different states have a complete different legislation on this crucial issue of abortion. That's the very divisive, right, dividing up of the opinion. From us, when we look at it, we think, wow, it's really, really bad. But it looks like the majority opinion, they think this is acceptable. So whether the Congress of the United States can make a decision about it, that's something really big.
Mm-hmm. Well, Harvey, lastly, of course, there's a little they can do to change the ruling. But for this pro-choice camp, is there any way for them to get around, for a woman, for example, if she pursues an abortion, maybe banned in the state she lives in, but she can still go to other states to do that without being criminalized?
It depends on what the states do. Of course, the pro-choice people are mobilizing to get people, especially poor people, to have access to abortions in other states, to get access to FDA-approved abortion drugs. But states may and are planning to criminalize those things. And there's some open constitutional questions. So there's a right to not have states interfere with interstate commerce. And this might be an example of that, but it's going to depend on future courts to make this kind of decision. Both sides have a lot of work to do. On the other side, the pro-life people, as they call themselves, are also working to make sure that there is no way that anybody can get an abortion in the United States. So that's their next goal. We're looking at a very tempestuous time.
So the fight goes on. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Jinzhao. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.